Hi everyone, and welcome back to Voices in Health and Wellness. This is the show where we dive into the real-world challenges, shifts and stories shaping the future of health and wellness industries. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Greenland, and today's guest is someone who bridges psychology, business leadership and human performance, Ruth Cooper Dixon. She's the founder of Ruth Cooper Dixon Limited and a champion for integrating mental well-being into professional culture. Ruth is also an award-winning positive psychology practitioner and speaker who's worked with organizations across the globe to rethink how well-being strategies are built and, crucially, communicated. So, Ruth, welcome, and thank you very much for agreeing to join us this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me. I love that intro. Can you just follow me around at different clients and just, here you go, this is me. I love that.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome. So for those new to your work, could you give us a little snapshot of what you do and who you serve through Ruth Cooper Dixon Limited?
Yes, there's two clients that I have. One is business to business. So I grew actually a very successful large consultancy and actually changed that, and I'll perhaps share a little bit about that, but I rebranded under my own name at the end of 2023 for the launch of the new year of 24. So that work tends to be predominantly global corporates, organizations. I'm based in the UK, in Essex. I tend to work a lot in person in London, but as we know, with the COVID pandemic and the way that work is now, it actually opened it up where I work a lot with organizations and their teams across the globe and do a lot of global work. So working in different time zones as well. And that's everything around the wellbeing strategy of an organization. So right from that leadership board piece, whether that's training, coaching, outlining the wellbeing strategy, right down to mental health first aid training. So the whole spectrum, really. And that has changed and it has evolved. It'll be 10 years in next week, October the 3rd. I've had the business, and it's, as we know, this space has definitely evolved. Mm-hmm. And my other client is the business to consumer, and that's starting to grow a little bit more now because I spent a lot of time working predominantly with corporates, albeit, sometimes those people were one-to-one, coaching clients, but I'm doing a lot more in the grief space, one-to-one. And also where people have come across me perhaps on a talk or a webinar that their organization might have brought me in for World Mental Health Day, and they really like me and how my approach and what I'm talking about, and they kind of want to be able to work with me, off their own sort of back. So that's starting to really develop, I feel like, this year particularly. And I suppose I've had more time because I'm not running a team or quite a larger, smaller business, if that makes sense. But yeah.
Really interesting. And what inspired you to bring psychology into the workplace and leadership development? What's the kind of driver for this?
So I started my career at 19 at working at Rolls-Royce Aerospace, which is where I'm from in Derbyshire. And I ended up working in business and change programs and not knowing anything really then about psychology or organizational change. But I kind of saw the impact of what change had on organizations. And back then, change, in the late 90s was this kind of glamorous, cool thing that happened. It was all planned out and not like we think of it now as change happening all the time and frequently. So I learned lots actually very early on in my career without even probably taking it on board, knowing the depth of it, of kind of how people responded to change at work and emotions and behavior. And I learned from that. And so stayed in business. I actually then became a trained project manager. And I actually ended up spending a lot of time working in London in finance, in investment banking and wealth management, again, as a HR project manager, I suppose, because most of the time, again, back in the early noughties, mid noughties, it was more project managers were either product facing or they were IT. They weren't people project managers. Again, that was a fairly new thing. So I was working a lot with onboarding employee, setting up those programs, working on leadership programs, seeing the whole employee life cycle. And so I suppose looking back, there was always I always describe it as there was a thread of people to everything I did, although I wasn't HR, I wasn't wellbeing. And so that kind of evolved. And then when diversity and inclusion became sort of very high on the agenda. I ended up working in a consultancy, and I started working on designing programs when unconscious bias training became a bit more of a hot topic, and inclusive leadership, inclusive recruitment, because I'd spent a lot of time understanding that in organizations. But I was always really fascinated because for me, mental health and well-being mental health particularly was only ever considered under sort of disability and from the Equality Act. And I was very much, somebody who really was passionate about wellness. I'm a runner. I've always done a lot of fitness. I've always tried to look after myself. That's always been something that's been part of me. But I felt like well-being was something that was around us, and it changed as we changed and we grow older and life changes and different things come and impact on us. And it was my own lived experience. So 2015, I went through a series of personal life changes. So a divorce, relationship breakdown. I kind of threw myself into my job to kind of distract from what was happening at home, which lots of us can do as a coping strategy, which again worked for a period of time. Performance was massively high. And then, of course, moving into that strain zone, pretty much hit crisis. And I'd always had panic attacks. I'd had them since I started work at 19, but I didn't tell anybody about them. I mean, even my mum was a nurse and she wasn't a mental health nurse. So she said, well, maybe it's your blood pressure or something. I just never really spoke. I was too ashamed. I couldn't really understand why, because it was so physical. It was sweating and going red. And it was something that I just kind of had all these very elaborate avoidance mechanisms and coping strategies to deal with. And it often manifested a lot. It was more in the workplace. But I had a very sort of severe panic attack at work in that summer of 2015 and was signed off work. And that's when I was kind of very fortunate, rushed into therapy. And that's when I was diagnosed with panic disorder and generalized anxiety disorder at the time, which was then this whole light bulb moment. But I also couldn't figure out when I came back into work why no one wanted to talk about it. And I got, now that it was very traumatic. It happened in a small office and, the glass walls and everything. And I think I kind of likened it to if you'd been off with a physical health condition or if you'd been diagnosed with a physical health condition, like no one really wanted to bring it up. And I suppose back then it was something, and still is now in lots of places, that stigma that's attached to whether I say anything, don't I say anything. So I chose to be very open. And what I found was the more that I spoke about my experience, the more people went, oh, me too, or something similar, or my sister, or I had a boss once. And it'd start all these conversations. So I couldn't figure out why we weren't talking about it more at work. And so I decided to leave. And I actually don't really know. It wasn't like I went, oh, I'm going to start a business on this. It was just, I'm going to leave and bang the drum about this, in organizations. And I had a very good city network in London. And I had a lot of EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion network from work as well. And yeah, I think it was the very early adopters that kind of were sort of like, yeah, this is something we want to get on board with. And mental health first aid training hadn't long been in the UK as well, in England. So that was kind of evolving as a product. And some forward thinking corporates were really looking at that. So I trained in that and also decided to go and do my MSc in applied positive psychology and coaching psychology, because that really resonated with me as a psychology discipline. I liked the fact it talked about becoming well and looking after yourself, preventative, but it also, as positive psychology has evolved over the last couple of decades, it looks more at resilience and death and grief and all the difficult parts of life as well. And I just wanted, I guess, the academic underpinning, because I've always believed in when you're talking about these things, yes, lived experience is very important and it's great for a talk on a certain topic, but for me it was about being informed and I suppose taking my career at a different direction, kind of almost at that point, was coming into sort of midlife. So yeah. That's a very long explanation.
No, thank you. It's actually really fascinating to hear the backstory and how it's led you to do what you do today. I mean, can you distill down what, with all that you do at the moment, what is your core mission and how has it kind of evolved over time?
So I always say my core mission is helping people put themselves back together when I usually say a swear word when everything falls apart. And, and I believe that is true for organizations as well. When everything falls apart, I think I've seen that happen, over COVID, and then subsequently trying to understand the future of work, and our workplaces are so fragmented and what's happening in the world as well, and the impact that has. So it kind of works with organizations and with individuals, and also where individuals feel like everything's, how to sort of support people to rebuild themselves. And I think that's probably got much clearer, I think, for me now, whereas before in the past, I definitely had that. But as my consultancy grew and the demand was there for more training, and I had a bigger team, and then I brought people on board and I had people that delivered training for me, it became much more about helping organizations to sort of ingrain that culture of positive mental wealth, as I call it. So that still exists. But I think because I spend a lot of time working with organizations now who are really going through a lot of change continually, and how do they support their employees through that, and also rebuild for what's next, I think.
Fascinating. What about marketing all of this? I mean, I don't know how sort of your potential customers, clients sort of see this at the outset, but how do you go about marketing this and kind of getting your message over, and the importance of all of this?
It's so interesting that you asked that question, because I've had over at different points in my business, and I've just actually taken back on board my original marketing freelance who was with me for quite a number of years. But I think the work that I've done really speaks for itself. And so I've ended up, for example, in certain industries like the legal profession, insurance, where people have referred me, or then I've worked with what I really love is the fact that a lot of my clients I've been working with now 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and been a part of their wellbeing strategy and journey as an organization. And so that's continually evolved. And then where people have moved elsewhere, and they've taken a different job, and then they've gone, I need to bring you in because I like the way that you work. But I think what's interesting, and I was talking to a client about this morning, is that I think the space has changed quite a bit, where I don't get as much sort of ad hoc requests for talks and webinars. And I'm wondering, I think the clients that I tend to work with are very strategic, and they're not, it's World Mental Health Day, let's just run a talk and that's it for the rest of the year. I think there was a period of that where organizations felt that that's how they did well-being. And of course, like if I'm going to do a talk, I'll make it as impactful. I give handouts, and I'm not necessarily always going to turn work down. But I think personally as well, in the last 18 months since there's only so much time I have available, I probably work more on that deeper level with an organization, which for me, I like to see the real value of that. I find that really rewarding when I'm in a client next week, and they were one of my original organizations that I trained back in 2016, with their first mental health first aider cohort. They've now got a huge global wellbeing committee that spans all levels from right up to partner level, and they're all trained and they're doing these amazing things. So I've been part of that, which is I just think is really great. So I feel like you have a deeper impact.
Amazing. Are there any specific trends or pressures that you think have pushed leaders and organizations to take this stuff more seriously?
Yeah, I think what happened with COVID was really interesting, because there was that pause as we headed into the first lockdown in March, and then all the organization, again, testament to the types of businesses I work with, they were all like, right, what do we need to do? Let's get this all, what can we do to support our people? And that went obviously on for a number of years. So I think those organizations have kind of carried on that. And despite what has come out, particularly in the US recently, with the change in president and everything with regards to equality, diversity, and inclusion, particularly because often mental health and wellbeing can often sit under that space. But again, I feel like the organizations that I work with, where they've perhaps re-strategized around that still hasn't been less of a priority. And I think organizations are realizing, I think the world, in what's happening even on a global stage, and not only that, but what's also happening here in England, in the UK, people are struggling enough already. And then combined with the pressures of work, it doesn't leave a lot of capacity for people at all. If most people are reacting, most people are, lots of people are, I don't know, to always use the phrase burnt out, but the people, people aren't necessarily looking after themselves in the best way. But there's a lot of pressure. Pressure comes on from all different sides. So yeah, I think it's really tough. I say I do a lot of people manager training, and I kind of start off with like, it's a really hard job, and I don't have a magic answer, because it is. I mean, I think it'd be really difficult to be a people manager right now. There's a lot happening to support everybody individually. It's a lot.
I mean, presumably the forward-thinking companies can see this as a return on investment.
Yes.
Of, productivity, less time off sick, better employee satisfaction, less turnover, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there is all of that, where we know, what the original study that was done by Warwick University years ago was that, people, if they're productive, if they're happy at work, they're 12% more productive. We know if people are, not necessarily commuting the whole time. We've seen lots of data and studies that have been done around the 4-day work week, which recently the pilot within all those organizations completed, and people were finding they were more productive even working the 4 days rather than the 5. The flexibility around hybrid working for those in corporate jobs where that's an option. But again, it comes back to managers knowing, there's a lot here around things like psychological safety and building trust. And I did a training earlier on this week, and one of the managers was saying to me, well, I've got a fully remote person. How do I build that relationship with them, on an informal level? And I was sort of saying, well, because they are remote, you probably need to put in the diary at least once a month. They're, start off with an hour, but it might be a bit less than that, but just a catch up, which is informal, which you actually say, look, we're not going to talk about work. I'd just love to spend a bit of time with you, because you don't get that interaction that I have with everyone else when they come in, and we have those informal, I hate that phrase, water cooler chats, but just the general conversation that if I'm in the office 3 days a week, I'm going to get with that manager. So, there has been a lot of consultancy studies that have been done around where remote workers or those that are hybrid but don't go into the office very much, you're obviously going to lose that connection if those conversations aren't being had anywhere else. There's going to be a disparity there, and we're seeing that with people feeling more lonely as well. So
got it.
Yeah.
So what does it look like when you go into a company? How do you kind of get under the bonnet and work out what a client needs? What's your kind of process for sorting them out?
I generally see, so first of all, it's kind of like, what else do you have? What have you got in place at the moment? What is asking sort of, I suppose, a series of different kind of coaching questions, like what does the leadership think of wellbeing and mental health? What's your exec sponsorship? Who have you got as champions? What are your toxic or hotspot areas in the business? Where do you know you've got problems? What's going well? And, from a positive psychology perspective of appreciative inquiry, what's going well? What can you do more of? And also what can this look like? I've had clients or potential clients who've said, we need 3 cohorts of mental health first aiders. I'm like, okay, but what else are you doing? Because you train a bunch of people up for 2 days and then then what? How are they supported? What do they do? Who tells the rest of the organization about them? How do they show up? All of these, how do you monitor the data from the conversations they're having? So it's more of that strategic roadmap and figuring out what that looks like. And that's, I think, what's been so different for me is working with clients to say, what does 20, for example, at the moment, I'm doing lots of these types of conversations since the beginning of this month, really. What does 2026 look like? Because the HR wellbeing or the business leaders who are responsible for this, they have their budget, or they're either being allocated their budget or they're putting in their requests for budgets for the start of next year. So it's kind of like, well, how can I maximize this as well? What can that look like? And I think because I've worked with people for so long now, they trust me to kind of go, this is what we could do instead, or this is how we could squeeze this, or especially those I've worked with for a while, this is where if you're buying all of this, we can look at discounting some stuff, because I want it to make it as value add as possible. So it's really, just seeing what that looks like, and then I think they like it because they have a plan, and it doesn't feel like you're just throwing paint at a wall and just seeing if it's gonna, or jelly, whatever the phrase is, just throwing something at the, and thinking, oh, we've done it, and then wondering why nothing's changed.
I understand.
Yeah.
So is there anything that's particularly resonating with your clients right now in all the sort of things that you offer them? Is there certain things that stick more than others?
I think so. Mental health first aid has always been a program which I think is popular. It's something that adds to the framework of a workplace wellbeing strategy, and it's very, very useful. Grief, I'm finding, is becoming a bit more of a hot topic. Understanding grief and making sure managers know how to support someone who's going through a bereavement, and also recognizing grief comes in many shapes and forms. And I'm doing a lot more talks around that, a lot more coaching around that as well, which I think is really great. And seeing organizations think about what's their grief policy, how does that look? How does that translate? What support do you have internally for grief and bereavement? So grief is definitely one. As I said before, change is kind of very much a hot topic, like navigating change. How does that impact? Just from some of the I think people really like the basics around the neuroscience about understanding, how the brain responds to change, and looking at things like the change curve and those models which enable people to, this is why I respond in this way, and also as an organization, as a team, how do we kind of move through this process together and support each other? So that's another area that's been really a big deal. And then there's lots of the usual stuff, living with anxiety, navigating anxiety. They're probably kind of some of the main ones, and then lots of the, I suppose it's like, when you think of flavor of the month, but things like menopause have become much more prevalent, talking about that, which is not an area that I generally talk about, I'm an expert in, but I know organizations doing great work about menopause policy and training and support, and having open conversations about that, and supporting employees who are neurodivergent, but also being able to equip managers to have those conversations, and signposting and adjustments and support, which enables, from a social model of disability, it just creates inclusion for everybody. Some of those practical adjustments. So I got to do a launch in an organization over the summer for the sunflower lanyard, the hidden disabilities sunflower lanyard. One of my clients launched that with, so I was the keynote speaker with their CEO, because I wear mine when I travel. So yeah, I think things like that are becoming kind of at the forefront as well.
And on the flip side, are there any things that are particularly frustrating or feel like bottlenecks in the work that you do?
I still feel that even now, after 10 years, if I'm being brutally honest, I still feel there is still that gap between sort of the leadership and then putting things into plan. Like, so, I always remember describing it as like the Christmas cake, the traditional Christmas cake. So you've got all your employees, which are all your raisins and your cake mix and everything, and then you've got that marzipan layer, which is your people managers, usually leaders, who are often really squoze because they get stuff from the top and they've got all of this stuff to manage and look after, as well as their own jobs and their own mental health and well-being and performance. And then you've got this lovely icing. And, I think I find not always is well-being, it's seen as still this thing on the side. It's not part of, I would love it, and maybe not just yet, maybe for another, maybe a couple of decades, start to ease out of work. But I would love it so that well-being is part of what's happening as the business, in the business processes, and it's part of the training for appraisals and understanding those and how people work. And when we look at a project or a program of work in an organization, are we thinking about with the resources from a well-being lens and resilience? And I know that from being a project manager, managed programs of work. So yes, we've got all these names on a list, but do we think about the person behind that? And I just don't know if I still think there's a disconnect there, which there shouldn't be. And I think that is changing in lots of the organizations I do work with, but I think it's still seen as something that is separate to, business as usual, when it should be just, if you've got people, you've got a well-being, you need a well-being plan, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So obviously you're a business person, you run a very successful business. Are there any particular metrics or signals that you watch out for in what you do, whether it's growth, impact, engagement? What do you kind of look at to make sure that you're having the impact that you need?
It depends if my accountant's going to listen to this. He's been my best friend for a long time, since I was 14. He'll be like, Ruth, you should know all of these answers. So I do, obviously making a profit. I think it's been really hard, and I still think it is often for people who work in well-being, wellness, when we deeply, passionately care about what we're doing, that sometimes making money can feel a little at odds with that. And, for when I had my bigger consultancy, I actually had a social enterprise where I would do pro bono work. So I did a program for women who'd experienced domestic abuse and violence for a charity, and had a team of volunteers, coaches, professional coaches who supported me. And I actually coached humanitarian aid workers out in the field. I'm about to start a program now, that when that closed down, when my consultancy all changed, and what I used to do is have part of my revenue, 20% of everything that I build in my consultancy would go to that organization. So it was kind of a CSR for clients to work with me as well, because they were part of that social impact. And we had kind of key metrics around what we would measure. I've just started doing I'm about to start doing a pro bono coaching program for a certain population of a charity that I'm working with, and we're just about to launch that hopefully very soon. So I feel like I'm able to give something back there. But I think for me it's the impact that I have from feedback that I get. I often get asked to give quotes to clients. I was in a company report for one of the law firms, the annual company report from the responsible business side. So those kind of qualitative measures I really love to be able to see and be a part of. And I think from a marketing perspective, having a reach, that is important. I think because there's there's so much content out there. For me, it's about having that it's often the feedback. I launched my own podcast 3 weeks ago, and I've had over 2,000 downloads. Now I was genuinely shocked by that, because I thought if 50 people downloaded it, I would be happy. So, as you said, people, as we were chatting offline before, I think you can get in the past as well, with my ADHD brain, I can get so hung up on an arbitrary number, sometimes something I've set for myself, and will literally burn myself out to get to something which in fact didn't mean anything in the first place. So I suppose it's profit, making a living for me, I've got a bit more of a team now again, which is really lovely because I started 2024 off with nobody. And so the last few months, I've brought even more back office staff on, which is great. So that's really supporting my mental health. And yeah, just having that great impact, having opportunities, talking to like you today, you know, things that perhaps wouldn't even come along before. So yeah.
Great. So let's zoom out. Where would you like to see your work go in the next 6 to 12 months? So fairly short term, but what's on the cards for you?
So I am about to launch, hopefully end of October, a online course for individuals, on-demand online training course. I suppose training course for it's called Beyond the Grief. So practical sort of coaching, grief support. If you've had therapy or you're stuck and you need that kind of, you know, practical tools to enable yourself to move forward at your own pace. Something I've been wanting to do for a while. So that's going to launch next month. So I'd love that to be successful. I'd love to see that be taken up. That would be really, really cool for me to do that. And I've just I'm starting grief circles next month as a kind of an opportunity for people to come together and just listen and support each other, like as a non-therapeutic space with me facilitating that. And so I'm hoping those will take off. And I'm doing a lot more on kind of radio as well in the media. And so I have a dream. I'd love to be able to host a sort of classical music, wellbeing type show. So I'm going to put that out there into the universe. That would be something that I would be extremely happy if that came along.
Wow. So very different from the day job, but amazing.
Yeah. I'm on the radio tomorrow. I have a breakfast show on local radio. I do it on a Friday, but nice. I really love radio. As you can probably tell, I could talk for days. I have to remember to play some music. But classical music was a big part of my life when I was unwell, and it really kind of supported me as a self-care tool. So yeah.
If I was to give you a magic wand to change one thing about how your business operates or scales, what would that be?
Oh, that's such a good question. That's such a good coaching question as well. One thing that I could change. I think it would be to have more people supporting me that enables us to get more of the products and support out there to individuals that they can use as support for themselves. So it frees up my time. That would be kind of the dream, which I'm slowly starting to happen again now, but not for anyone else to be, I suppose, doing the work that I do, but just having a better, a bigger team at the back office to kind of do that support. I think that would be great, and just see sort of a bigger impact and a wider impact. Yeah.
Is that just about sort of the back office, or do you want sort of to replicate yourself and have more of yourselves working?
No, I don't actually, because that's what I did. That's what I did with the consultancy. Okay. And I think I've done that, and I think it was really successful. And but I changed so much, and I know what my brain likes, and I know how I like to work. And like you said with the radio, I call it my ribbons from my ADHD perspective when I was working with my own coach when I was diagnosed at the end of 2022. And I like having all these different strands to what I do, and they make me feel ribbony. So as you said, the radio brings me a lot of joy. It's very different to being in a corporate, but they both offset each other. And I like the fact that my week looks very diverse, and nothing ever looks the same week in, week out. probably to the chaotic nature of the rest of my team think it looks like. But it's good fun, and I'm loving it. So yeah, I found my second wind 10 years in, so it's good.
Amazing. If your business suddenly got 10 times the visibility, and who knows what might happen with this podcast, and a huge influx of new leads or inquiries, what would be the first thing that breaks? And hopefully not you.
Yeah, no, I don't think it would be me. I think we would bring in very quickly, which we have done for some of our design work, but bringing in other admin support, which we're probably not far off that now, because my assistant is becoming much more as a exec assistant, and knows me through and through and knows my diary and knows my brain and knows how I operate, having that kind of sort of a support that could, you know, if loads of leads came in, we would know how to sort of manage that. And also being able, I think I'm in a better position now and a stronger position, a more discerning of actually that isn't for me, I'll pass it on to somebody else. You know, it's not for me, or this isn't the right type of, you know, or not, is it really the work that I want to do? And I think in the past it would be, oh, it's work, let's do it and pass it out to the team. Whereas now I'm like, do I have time for this? Does it fill me up? Is it good business? Am I the best person for it? All of those sort of qualifying questions. Yeah.
And finally, looking back, if you were to start all over again tomorrow, would you do anything differently?
No, because I feel like I did that at the end of, I think, 2023. You know, the website, the name changed, the website changed. It started January the 1st, just me. And it was a big team before. I had to relearn everything. So I feel like I've gone through that evolution. And actually, that was really, looking back now, I mean, that was a really brave thing to do, but also could have been completely stupid, but actually worked in my favor. I suppose there was I had lots of support and mentorship, and I knew I was my intuition told me that it was the right thing to do, but actually with some distance for a lot, that could have gone horribly wrong in lots of ways, if I hadn't have done the process right. So, yeah.
On that note, Ruth, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. This has been a really brilliant conversation. Thank you for your openness, your honesty. I think your perspective on blending authentic leadership with wellbeing messaging is something that more founders and companies need to hear. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Andrew.